Clara Vance was 42 years old, and she had never imagined that the most dangerous man in her life would be the same man who still texted her every night to remind her to wear something warm. But at 3:12 in the morning, beneath the freezing rain sweeping across the Seattle harbor, one phone call began to tear apart 12 years of marriage. Clara was inspecting the cold storage area when her phone began vibrating again and again. Her mother's name appeared on the screen. Beatrice rarely called after 10 at night, and she never called when she knew her daughter was working the night shift. Clara stopped beneath a steel awning and answered. There was no greeting on the other end. Only short, broken breaths and a hoarse sound, as though someone were trying to swallow the pain. "Clara, I'm at the police station." Beatrice's voice was so faint that the rain nearly drowned it out. Clara straightened. The professional instinct that had been sleeping inside her suddenly came alive. "Where are you hurt?" Beatrice said. Julian had arrived at the farm close to midnight. He had not called ahead, and he had not brought a gift for Chloe like he usually did. He walked straight into the storage shed, asked about the property documents, and tried to force her to sign several papers. When Beatrice refused, the warmth vanished from his face. Julian accused her of pushing Clara toward divorce and destroying his family. Then came the sound of metal striking the floor. Beatrice remembered only the small crowbar used to pry open wooden crates in Julian's hand. She stepped backward, hit the tool rack, and her knees gave way. The pain in her chest stole the air from her lungs. Clara gripped the phone until her knuckles turned white, but her voice remained steady. "Which hospital are you in?" Beatrice began to cry. She was not in a hospital. Julian had told the police that she had injured herself. He claimed she was becoming confused with age, imagining that people were watching her. The officers were now asking whether she had ever been diagnosed with memory loss. Clara immediately understood what Julian had done. He was not simply denying the attack. He was trying to destroy Beatrice's credibility before she could reveal anything else. Julian's message was still on Clara's phone, sent at 11:30 that night. It showed a pizza box on his office desk, with architectural plans visible in the background. The message beneath it was gentle enough to make her blood run cold. "I have to work late. Remember to drink something warm." The photo had been sent almost 2 hours before Beatrice's call. Julian had built his alibi in advance, convinced that no one would remain calm enough to question it. Clara told her mother not to sign anything, not to answer any more questions without a lawyer, and to demand medical imaging and a full record of every injury. Beatrice's voice trembled as she asked whether Clara believed her. In Clara's mind appeared the image of her 73-year-old mother, still harvesting apples with her own hands, still remembering every birthday, still storing tax records in boxes labeled with careful precision. "I believe you." Those 3 words made Beatrice cry even harder. But for Clara, they were more than comfort. They were a decision. Clara handed her shift over to the deputy supervisor, crossed the parking lot, and started her Jeep. Before leaving the harbor, she opened the document compartment beneath the seat. Inside lay her old identification card from the high-tech crime division. In Yakima, a young officer believed Beatrice's daughter was nothing more than a night security manager. Julian believed the same thing. Neither of them knew that Clara had spent nearly 10 years solving cases built on fabricated data, staged photographs, and statements so perfect that they became suspicious. The Jeep surged into the fog. Clara was not driving toward her family. She was driving straight into a crime scene. Clara arrived at the Yakima County Police Station at 5:15 in the morning. The rain had stopped, but the wind still whipped across the parking lot, carrying the smell of wet soil and ripe apples from the nearby farms. She stepped out of the car in a black coat, still beaded with water, her face showing no anger. It was that calmness that made the officer at the front desk look up a second time. Beatrice sat at the end of the hallway with her back against the wall, both hands clutching the thin blanket provided by the police station. One side of her face was swollen and red. Every time she breathed in, her shoulders tightened with pain. Beside her, the young officer Leo was taking notes, but his eyes still held the caution of someone who had already decided which story to believe. Clara did not rush over to embrace her mother. She observed first. There was no medical staff, no photographs of the injuries, no evidence bag for the clothing. Beatrice was still wearing her sweater, and a dried streak of blood marked the fabric across her chest. That meant the scene was being handled as a family dispute, not a serious assault. Leo stood and explained that Julian had cooperated fully. He was well connected throughout the area, had once designed a community center free of charge, and had donated money to the county children's fund. According to Julian, Beatrice had lost control, threatened him with a crowbar, and then fallen backward into a wooden shelf. Clara looked directly at the young officer. "My mother is 73 years old and has arthritis in both wrists. Did any of you test her grip strength?" Leo said nothing. Clara continued asking how much the crowbar weighed, where the first traces of blood had been found, whether the shoe prints had been photographed, and who had moved the tool from the storage shed. With every question, more of Leo's confidence disappeared. Detective Sarah Jenkins stepped out of her office when she heard the conversation. She had worked in law enforcement for more than 20 years and had enough experience to recognize that Clara was not a panicked relative. Sarah invited her into the office, but Clara insisted that Beatrice be taken to the hospital first. In the emergency room, the scans showed that 2 of Beatrice's ribs were fractured and that there was an oval-shaped bruise across her chest. The doctor said the injuries were not consistent with a simple fall. Shortly before 7 in the morning, Sarah agreed to return to the farm with Clara. The storage shed was still cold and dark. An overturned wooden crate lay beside the tool rack. Small droplets of blood were concentrated near the floor along the base of a low cabinet. Clara knelt down without touching anything. If 2 people had been struggling while standing, the blood would have been higher. "These marks are below knee level." Sarah followed Clara's gaze. She immediately understood what that meant. Beatrice had already been on the floor when the beating continued. Near the doorway, Leo discovered a small metal object trapped beneath a broken board. It was a silver pin shaped like a compass, the symbol of the Washington State Architects Association. Julian often wore it on his lapel during award ceremonies. The pin was bent. A strand of gray wool was tightly wrapped around its sharp edge. Sarah immediately ordered the evidence sealed. Clara looked down at the floor again. Beside the pin was a leather heel print that had pressed deeper into the surface than the other footprints. It was located exactly where Beatrice said she had fallen. At that moment, Leo no longer looked at Clara as a woman who worked the night shift at the harbor. He looked at her as an investigator reconstructing every second of the crime. But Julian still believed his story had not been broken. He did not know the silver pin had been left behind, and sometimes an arrogant man is not defeated by a confession. He is defeated by the small thing he believed was not worth bending down to pick up. By late morning, after Beatrice had been moved to an observation room, Clara sat alone inside her Jeep behind the hospital. She did not cry. She opened her computer, connected to a secure network, and called a former colleague who had worked with her in the high-tech crime investigation unit. Clara asked only for a review of legally accessible emergency data, the companies registered under Julian's name, the loans involved in active lawsuits, and any transactions connected to Beatrice's farm. She did not need sympathy. She needed a number. 40 minutes later, that number appeared. Julian was more than $400,000 in debt. He had poured money into unlicensed cryptocurrency exchanges, borrowed through several intermediary companies, and used the assets of his architecture firm as collateral. Over the past 3 months, creditors had begun demanding payment. One of his companies had received a foreclosure notice. 2 business accounts were almost empty. But the debt was not what made Clara's blood run cold. It was a mortgage file bearing the name Beatrice Vance. The signature looked like her mother's, but the document had been signed during the exact week Beatrice was in the hospital receiving treatment for pneumonia. The appraisal covered the entire apple farm, the old house, and the land bordering the creek to the south. Julian had tried to turn the property Clara's father had left behind into security for his own debts. Everything connected at once. Julian had not gone to the farm because of a family argument. He had gone there to take the original property deed and force Beatrice to sign more documents. When she discovered the forged signature and threatened to call Clara, he attacked her. Then he created the story of a delusional elderly woman so that her accusation would have no legal value. Clara looked through the hospital window. For years, Julian had referred to her work as an ordinary security shift. He laughed when she talked about evidence preservation procedures. He believed Clara had left law enforcement because she was no longer sharp enough. He was wrong. Clara's phone vibrated. It was Chloe. The girl said her father had just messaged her, saying he would pick her up early from school. Julian told her they needed to leave Seattle for a few days because her grandmother was causing trouble and her mother might be detained by the police. Clara immediately called the school, but Julian had arrived a few minutes earlier. She did not panic. She instructed the staff to keep Chloe in the office while asking her aunt to pick the girl up using an authorization document already on file. When Julian realized he could not take Chloe, he left the parking lot before the police arrived. 30 minutes later, Clara met her daughter at the aunt's house. Chloe sat in a chair with both hands wrapped tightly around her phone. She did not know whom to believe. For months, Julian had told her that Clara was cold, selfish, and that she hated their family. He claimed Beatrice wanted to separate her parents simply because she did not like him. Clara did not force her daughter to choose a side. She placed the phone on the table and told Chloe she had the right to ask her father anything she wanted. When the girl agreed, Clara activated the recording function. Julian answered immediately. His voice was gentle. He said both Chloe's mother and grandmother were becoming delusional. He claimed he had only defended himself and that every piece of evidence against him had been created by Clara so she could win custody. Chloe remained silent for a long time before speaking in a trembling voice. If Grandma injured herself, why did you hide the crowbar in the trunk before the police arrived? The other end of the line went silent. Julian did not ask where Chloe had heard that. He did not deny that the crowbar had been inside the car. He snapped that Chloe was too young to understand. That no one had the right to destroy his career. That Beatrice should have stayed quiet and signed the documents as he had instructed. Clara watched her daughter's expression change. The confusion was gone. Only pain remained. Julian kept talking, and with each sentence, he pulled himself deeper into the trap created by his own arrogance. He admitted that he had taken the documents from the storage shed. He said none of this would have happened if Beatrice had known how to obey. Chloe reached out and ended the call. She turned toward her mother as tears rolled down her cheeks. Dad did not go there to defend himself, did he? Clara pulled her daughter into her arms. For the first time in years, the cold shell around her broke apart. No, sweetheart. He went there because he believed none of us were strong enough to stop him. The recording was still running on the table. And on the other end of the call, Julian still did not know that his own daughter had just become the person who heard the truth more clearly than anyone else. 3 months later, Julian Vance entered the courtroom wearing a dark blue suit, his hair still combed neatly as it had been during architectural award ceremonies. He looked toward the family seating area and gave a small smile, as though maintaining his composure would be enough to make everyone continue believing he was the refined man who had once built a library for children free of charge. But this time, no one could see the mask anymore. Beatrice sat between Clara and Chloe. Her 2 fractured ribs had healed, but whenever the weather turned cold, pain still moved through her chest. She did not lower her head. She stared directly at the son-in-law who had tried to turn her into a confused old woman simply so he could steal the home her husband had spent his life protecting. Julian continued to insist that he was innocent. His attorney argued that the silver pin could have fallen inside the storage shed during an earlier visit. The blood found near the floor could have appeared when Beatrice fell on her own. The recording with Chloe was described as an angry outburst that had been removed from its proper context. Each argument sounded reasonable when considered alone, but Clara had learned during her years of investigative work that truth is not found in one piece of evidence. It is found in the way every detail fits together. Detective Sarah Jenkins presented footage from the dashboard camera of a delivery vehicle. The video showed Julian stopping near the farm on the night of the attack. When he opened the trunk, he removed a small crowbar wrapped in cloth. Location data from his phone showed that he had left Seattle hours before the pizza photograph was sent to Clara. The image had not been taken at 11:30 that night as he claimed. The original file information showed that it had been created the previous afternoon and scheduled to send automatically. Julian's perfect alibi collapsed within minutes. Then came the financial records. A handwriting expert confirmed that Beatrice's signature on the mortgage agreement had been copied from an old power of attorney document. Bank transactions showed that Julian owed more than $400,000 and had used forged documents to obtain additional loans before his creditors seized his assets. Finally, the prosecutor played the recording. Julian's voice filled the courtroom. He said Beatrice should have stayed quiet. He admitted taking the documents from the storage shed. He said no one had the right to destroy his career. The smile disappeared from Julian's face. Chloe tightened her grip on her mother's hand. She did not cry. The past several months had taught her that loving someone did not mean protecting that person's lies. The jury did not take long to reach a verdict. Julian was convicted of intentionally causing serious injury to an elderly person, financial fraud, document forgery, and destruction of evidence. He received a sentence of 10 years in prison. The fraudulent mortgage agreements were canceled. The apple farm was returned completely to Beatrice. When the officers placed Julian in handcuffs, he turned and looked at Clara. His eyes no longer held charm or confidence. There was only the anger of a man who had finally realized that the woman he once underestimated was the one who had torn apart every layer of his disguise. Clara said nothing. She did not need to celebrate her victory with mockery. The truth had spoken for her. Several days later, Officer Leo came to the farm with Detective Sarah. Leo stood before Beatrice and apologized for believing Julian's reputation more quickly than the injuries on her body. Beatrice looked at him for a long moment before saying that a mistake only becomes dangerous when someone refuses to admit it and correct it. At the end of summer, Clara, Chloe, and Beatrice cleaned the storage shed together. They replaced the broken boards, repainted the door, and planted a row of lavender beside the path. Chloe hung her grandfather's old wind chime from the porch roof. When the wind moved through the apple orchard, its clear sound rang across the quiet afternoon. The three women stood beside one another, no longer trying to save a family that had been built on control and lies. They were creating a different family. A family that did not require anyone to remain silent in order to be loved. Julian believed his reputation, charm, and carefully constructed lies would protect him forever. But one overlooked piece of evidence, one recorded conversation, and three women who refused to remain silent brought the truth into the light. Now we want to hear from you. Do you think Julian's 10-year sentence was enough for everything he did to Beatrice, Clara, and Chloe? Share your opinion in the comments below. If this story kept you watching until the end, please give the video a like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss another powerful story of betrayal, courage, and justice.